What's up folks, I'm on a camping trip this weekend and I wanted to quickly go over a tent that I've been using and having a lot of success with. And that is the No Limits Kings Peak 2. So why was I even looking at getting this tent, the No Limits Kings Peak 2? Well, originally I was looking at a backpacking tent, because yeah, I do some backpacking, usually 1, maybe 2 trips a year, and it's nice to have a good backpacking tent, but I also do a lot of hunting trips and camping trips, and having something lightweight and compact really helps me do that. Camping is rarely an activity of its own for me. Usually it accompanies a hunting trip or a fishing trip or even a photography trip. Camping is how I get to go out and stay in all these cool places. It's not really an activity of its own. So all of these trips I'm bringing lots of other gear. I'm bringing my hunting gear, I'm bringing all kinds of stuff. So having a tent that's lightweight and compact is especially valuable in those type of scenarios. So that's why a backpacking style tent was a good option for me. And maybe you're looking for a tent specifically for backpacking, maybe your purpose is similar to mine, but it's a good option for either purpose. Now originally I had looked at some of the name brands in that category, Kelty, Marmot, Eureka, brands like that, and I've used some of those tents and been very familiar with them. But a lot of those tents looked like tents that had been out a while. It didn't look like there was a whole lot of innovation in a lot of those brands, and they're very good. In fact, I had a tent recently, and kind of the reason I bought this is I had a good tent that lasted me about 10 or 11 years. I had put well over 100 nights in that tent, and it was just time to retire it. So I was in the market for something new. And I took what I deemed to be a little bit of a risk, and I purchased a tent that cost well under $100, but the materials look good, the design looks good, and I just kind of wanted to pass on my experience about that tent in case you've seen this come up in search results or you've seen it in store. Let's go ahead and set this thing up and take a look at some of the features. So as you can see, when this thing's all set up, like a lot of modern backpacking tents, it kind of looks like a UFO, kind of space age looking. Something that I've found is when you set it up, if you know the direction of the wind, which you probably should when you're camping or hunting, go ahead and use the long sloping side towards the wind and the shorter sloping side on the downwind side. I found that helps because the wind can go over that long gradual slope more easily than on the short slope, and the tent will rattle around a little bit less. So that's the tent when it's set up, pretty good quality. One thing that's kind of a pain about this tent is it does take a while to set up. So it's kind of a combination of a half dome, a lot of you are familiar with that style, and more of a bivvy style shelter. Something that's basically a sleeping bag with a little pole that holds it up, gives it some elevation and loft. So this tent, it's got a high side and a low side. On the high side, you can just barely sit up inside it, and the low side, forget about it. You obviously can't stand up, you can't sit up. It's just enough room for your feet with a little bit of extra space, maybe for gear or something like that. So if standing up in a tent is something that you want, don't even consider this one. It's not gonna happen. But I do like that it's low profile. This tent has survived some pretty crazy Texas thunderstorms and really not budged at all. It's held watertight, it's held up against some really strong winds, and I've been really impressed. So it takes a little while to set up, and it's also not freestanding, so you have to stake it in. So again, if that's important to you, then this probably isn't one to consider. Originally I thought that was going to be kind of an issue, and I thought it was going to be kind of a negative, but in thinking about every time I'm actually using one of my tents, I'm always going to stake it in anyway. So if you need to, I don't know, set up a tent inside of a warehouse or inside of a room or something like that, this isn't going to work for you, just because you have to stake it in. And speaking of that, let's talk about the stakes that this thing comes with. So it comes with these just aluminum wire style stakes, and I know why they included these, just because they're extremely lightweight. And this tent, it takes a lot of stakes. between the actual tent and the Rainfly, it takes a total of 14 stakes to get this thing up. So that's a whole lot. So that's kind of a good thing and a bad thing. Good in that the tent is really, really sturdy. Like I said, it's held up to some pretty intense wind and storms. But bad in that it takes longer to hold, longer to set up. You got to carry more stakes. And just if you bend a stake, one more problem you're gonna have, really. And so that's kind of why I think they included these really lightweight, cheap stakes. Just because you're carrying so many stakes, they wanted to keep this thing lightweight. So that's what they included. So I've already replaced a couple of the stakes. I bought a pack of the MSR groundhogs. It's still an extruded aluminum stake, but it's kind of a 3-channel angle piece that makes it a lot stronger, and it's just as lightweight. You can get the steel stakes that are incredibly strong and really heavy duty, but I wouldn't recommend them for this tent because you're probably buying this because you want something that's lightweight. So if you're carrying those big bulky steel stakes, kind of defeats the purpose of something lightweight. So these ones, I'm using about half and half right now. I think I'm using 6 of these and 8 of the groundhog stakes by MSR. So I'll probably gradually replace all of them. While we're still looking at the outside of the tent, something I love about it is that it's symmetrical. So it's actually got a door on both sides. A lot of tents, especially the half domes or even full domes, have one side that's a door and maybe they have a window in the back. This one has a door on both sides, and especially if you're backpacking and you're cramming 2 people in this thing, that's really nice because you can get both people in there and you can have your own entrance and exit. And it has 2 vestibules as well. So if you want to put your boots, you want to put maybe a small pack under that vestibule to keep it covered, keep it dry, it works really well. And it's got a vent hood, this blue vent hood on both sides. So if it's really cold, that'll help vent some of the moisture. If it's really hot, hot air rises obviously, so that'll kind of help steam some of that hot air out of there. You can actually Velcro that hood closed. Normally I leave it open. I have no reason to close it. Even when it's really cold, I find it still helps, you know, kind of take some of the moisture and humidity out of your tent. So the tie-down straps on this tent, it's a nylon web strap, really sturdy. Again, that's not anything special about this tent. Lots of tents have that, but it's nice and heavy duty. I also like that where it attaches to the tent, it's actually reinforced right here. So it's going to be putting extra tension, obviously, on these corners, and that's where it's going to be likely to rip, so that's why they reinforced it. I like that. At first, I thought these were extra tie-downs for guy wires, and I thought it was kind of ridiculous, considering that this tent already takes 14 stakes to hold it up, and that it's already got quite a bit of loft and quite a bit of tension. I didn't think guy wires were necessary, but it's actually so you can roll up the door and keep it held open. So I actually like that feature a lot. And what's really nice, you probably can't see it in the daylight, but this has sort of a, I don't know if it's a glass filled material, but it's a highly reflective material like you see on a lot of running shoes and safety equipment. So you can actually find these really easily. If you're using a headlamp or even just a tiny bit of light, they reflect right back at you, so they're easy to find. So the zippers on this tent are pretty good. Actually, the zipper itself is very good quality, and it's got a little pull tab on there on all the zippers that I find nice. Just sometimes this flap, generally I like this flap because it, you know, is one more barrier keeping moisture out of your tent, but sometimes that gets caught in the zipper. That's a little bit annoying sometimes, but I'd rather have it and just be careful with it than not have it. So like I mentioned earlier, these doors can roll up pretty easily. You just unzip it, roll it up, and then it's got a string down here, which again has that same reflective material in there, so you can find it nice and easy, and then a loop up top. And then you just put this little clasp through there and cinch it down, and do the same back here. Like pretty much all tents with a really heavy duty Rainfly that's completely enclosed, I found it can get very hot during the day. So a lot of times I'll just roll up these sides and just leave it open, just open to the air. That'll help it from just staying a little bit cool, breathing a little bit, and keeping it from getting, you know, smelly and stuffy and nasty in there. These side walls up top are completely mesh. So down low, it's a solid nylon material, and then up top it's mesh. Some tents actually have a bottom that's kind of more like a tarp. It's got the ground cloth built in, This tent does not have it. It's just a heavy duty nylon, but the nylon on the bottom of the tent is a little bit thicker and tougher than this nylon in the sidewall. I personally actually don't like the tents with the tarp style bottom, just because I'm already gonna have a ground cloth anyway. I'd rather have a tent that's lighter and more compact, and I get to use my own ground cloth. So if that's something you really want, again, a caution about this tent. Another feature that I really like on the construction of this tent is a lot of the more important seams, like right here on the zipper, it's actually double stitched, and on the bottom and on the sidewalls actually, it's double stitched and taped. I don't know if you can see that strip of tape in there. So basically they lay both layers over each other, put a piece of tape in there, and then stitch it twice. And if a tent's gonna leak anywhere, it's most likely gonna be on the seams, so that just helps it be a little tougher, a little bit more water resistant on those seams. All right, now we're inside this tent. And this is not an extremely wide angle lens, this is pretty much a normal lens, so you can kind of get a pretty good picture of what it's like in here. Not a whole lot of room. And for me, this is perfect for a solo hunting trip. For a backpacking trip, you can squeeze 2 people in here, but I would say do it with somebody that you're pretty comfortable with, somebody you know pretty well. It's pretty tight quarters for 2 strangers. It's definitely smaller than my arm's width apart. One thing that's nice on the inside of this tent is when you lay up here, when you lay back, excuse me, there's this pocket that you can actually take it out if you want to, but it's got 3 pouches in here. And so you can use this to keep anything that you want to have easily at hand. So a lot of times when I'm camping, I keep a pistol, or I keep my wallet, or I keep a flashlight, and it's just ready to go in this pocket. And that's helpful because usually whatever you want to keep in that pocket, you don't want it rolling around on the floor of the tent. So I find that to be a nice feature. Like most tents, all the zippers are accessible from the inside and outside, so that's pretty standard. And then it's got all these standard stupid warning labels here too. So I mentioned earlier that this tent does not come with a ground cloth or tarp sewn into the bottom, and that I actually preferred it that way. You might be wondering why. Well, if I have an issue with the ground cloth, if I get a hole punched in it or it gets really dirty, because that's on the ground, so it's more likely to get dirty than anything else, I can either repair, replace, or clean that separately from the tent. So I don't have to worry about repairing my tent. I can just switch out the ground cloth and be good to go. So here's another little tip. If you need to buy a ground cloth, of course you can go out and just buy a hardware store brand tarp. It'll work just fine. But what I like to use is Tyvek. So if you're not familiar with Tyvek, it's made by DuPont. It's a waterproof material. I'm pretty sure it's what the paper in the Ride in the Rain notebooks are made out of. Because it's almost like a very stiff, plasticky paper type of feel. It's typically used to wrap homes. Like if you're building a house, you would buy a ton of Tyvek and it actually wraps the wood all the way around the house. Now I've found because of that, it's a little hard to buy in small quantities. If you just go to Home Depot or whatever, you can buy a roll of it that's 10 foot wide by 60 feet long or something like that. But I bought this from a guy on eBay who actually, I guess, bit the bullet, bought the whole roll or a couple rolls, and then cuts it to length and just sells individual sections. And he's only making a small percentage on top of that, but it's really convenient. So I think I got this whole sheet that works as my ground cloth for like $3, $5, something like that. So it's every bit as cheap as a tarp, but it's much lighter, it's much thinner, so it's easier to pack. It's just as waterproof, and it seems to be just as rugged. So handy tip, use Tyvek for your ground cloth. I know some of you purchase these tiny backpacking tents because you're impressed at how they can fit in a little baggie like this. And the first time you use it, it's awesome, but then every time after that, it's really hard to get it back in the bag. You're cramming it, you're stretching it, you're tearing your bag with your stakes, stuff like that. So with this tent, it's packaged decently, but I found a way to make it even better when you put it back. So with my method, not only can I get the tent and everything it comes with in this little bag, I told you I also bring extra stakes with me, and I bring that ground cloth with me. So I know I'm always going to be using those anytime I use the tent. So it's important for me to get those in the same bag as well. That's why I figured out this way to fold it up. It works great. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is take your tent, kind of once you drop it, the 2 peaks, the top peak and the bottom peak, they kind of fold in. And then you're going to want to take the tent and fold it long ways, so hot dog style. Fold it long ways and then fold it long ways again. So you end up with the tent in this one long strip. Next, you're gonna take the Rainfly, which I guess you already had to take that off, so maybe that's step one, whatever. You kind of pick up the Rainfly by the tall peak, and so it will kind of collapse in like an umbrella. And then you've got those two wings out to the side. You'll just kind of tuck those in, almost like you're folding like the sleeves in on a dress shirt, something like that. And then from there, you'll fold it long ways again. So you end up with this and another long skinny strip as well. And then the ground cloth, you kind of do the same thing. I already had it folded to match the footprint of the tent. And then I just took it and folded it twice long ways. So you get another long skinny strip. And then the order that I put it together is pretty important. I put the ground cloth down, then I put the Rainfly, then I put the tent in the middle, and then I put the poles and stakes on the inside. So a couple reasons why I do this. With the poles and stakes on the inside, they're gonna be protected. They're not gonna tear a hole in the bag. So many times on other tents, I've been trying to cram my poles in the side at the end, or trying to cram the stakes in, and I've torn the bag or stressed the bag, or at least stretched it a little bit. So with them on the inside, it's gonna center your weight and it's not gonna tear up the tent bag. And the reason I do the ground cloth on the bottom, then the tarp, then the tent, is I put it in that order because that's the order of how waterproof things are. The ground cloth is obviously gonna be your best prevention, then the Rainfly, then the tent. So this way, when it's rolled up, every single layer of the tent has a layer of Rainfly and ground cloth in between it. So when this goes back in your bag, if your tent gets caught in the rain, whatever, it's not gonna get soaked through. Even if one side of it gets a little bit wet, there's a barrier between each individual layer, so your whole tent won't get soaked. I've even left it completely out in a rainstorm and been perfectly fine doing it this way. So just kind of a recap and some pros and cons about this tent, just to kind of sum it all up. So pro, price. The value of this tent is excellent. It's much cheaper, probably about half the price of a lot of competitive options, and quality seems to be not quite as good, but pretty darn close. It's very weather resistant, it's very strong, it's lightweight, it's portable, so those are definitely some things I like about it a lot. It's definitely a tent I trust to bring out here in the field with me. So some cons. So if you are wanting to pile a bunch of people in here, or wanting a lot of room to spread out, it's pretty small on the inside. So that's a pro or a con depending on how you look at it. It takes a little bit longer to set up. It's not freestanding like I mentioned earlier. So I've actually used this tent on several different trips and lots of different terrains. Right here I'm just kind of in some open grass kind of on the side of the woods here. But I've used this in mountainous areas, I've used this kind of on a lake shore, lots of different terrains, and it's been just fine in all of them. So all in all, I don't think this is a tent that I'm gonna have for years and years and years and years, but I think for all my purposes right now, this is a fantastic tent, especially for the money. So if you were looking to learn a little bit about the Kings Peak 2 by No Limits, I hope you found this helpful. Whether you just bought this tent and you want to learn more about it, maybe you're looking at buying it, maybe you're just looking at getting into more camping and adventure type of stuff and you want to learn more about the gear that's there, or you follow my channel and you want to know a little bit more about my gear. So if you found this helpful, or you want to see more gear reviews or kind of more stuff about what I do when I'm out camping, out hunting, stuff like that, go ahead and click subscribe below because I put out these videos all the time. So until next time, stay safe, be free, and never stop seeking adventure.